The cell had no corners. Whoever built the detention block on the Threk cruiser Ashenfall had shaped it like a teardrop, smooth on every side, so that a prisoner could never back into an angle and feel steady. Marcus Webb had noticed that on his first hour aboard, and he'd found it almost funny. Somewhere in this ship's long design history, an engineer had studied human psychology reports closely enough to know that people like corners, and had built a room specifically to deny them one. He sat on the floor anyway, back against the curved wall, legs crossed, and waited. 3 days earlier he had walked onto a landing platform on a moon called Varen's Reach, wearing a gray suit that didn't fit quite right, carrying a translation earpiece, and a folder of documents that no longer mattered. He had gone there to negotiate a ceasefire between the human colonies at the edge of the Kestrel Expanse and the Threk Dominion, a coalition of 11 alien species bound together mostly by fear of a 12th. The talks had lasted 4 hours. Then a Threk officer named Soren had accused the human delegation of stalling for time while a colony fleet regrouped, which was true, and the meeting had ended with soldiers instead of handshakes. Webb was the only one they'd kept alive. He didn't know why yet, though he suspected it had to do with the folder still zip-tied to his wrist, and the words printed on its cover in 6 languages. Medical release. Terminal. The door dissolved rather than opened, an iris of dark material folding back into the wall, and General Threk Von walked in. He was tall in the way a lot of Threk were tall, closer to 8 feet than 7, with a long skull plated in bone the color of old ivory and eyes set low and wide like a hammerhead shark's. He wore command black, no medals, no ornamentation except a single ring of white metal fused into the bone above his left eye, a mourning ring. Webb had read once in a briefing packet, worn by officers who had lost their entire birth clutch in infancy and survived alone. It made him rare among his people. It made him respected. It also, Webb suspected, made him dangerous in a specific way. A creature who had already lost everything once and built a life anyway tended not to be afraid of losing it again. Ambassador Webb, Threk Von said. The translator strapped to his throat rendered his voice flat and metallic, though something under it still carried a rasp of the original. You slept. I did, Webb said. Your cell doesn't have corners. Took me a while to get comfortable. You are aware of your position. I have some guesses. Threk Von's eyes narrowed. The closest his face came to any human expression. Your delegation caused the deaths of 41 of my soldiers in the platform assault. Your government has not answered our ceasefire terms in 6 hours, which under our law means rejection. I have been given authority to make an example that will end this war before it spreads to your inner colonies. He paused, watching for the fear to arrive. In 7 of your days, at the turn of what you call morning, you will be executed publicly, broadcast to your entire species and mine. I promise you this. It will happen. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he started laughing. It wasn't performance. It came up out of him the way a cough does, involuntary, and it kept going longer than he wanted it to, until his eyes were wet and his ribs ached against the cold floor. Threk Von stood very still and watched him with the particular stillness of a predator recalculating an assumption. I'm sorry, Webb finally managed, wiping his face with the back of his wrist. I'm not laughing at you. I want you to know that. It's just, you have no idea what you just said. I have said that you will die. Yeah, Webb said. I know. I've known for about 4 months now. Longer than you have. He held up the folder, still zip-tied to his wrist, turned it so the general could read the 6-language stamp across the front. Pancreatic, Webb said. Stage 4 when they caught it. I've got maybe 5 weeks left with treatment, 3 without. I volunteered for Varen's Reach because I figured if I was going to die anyway, I'd rather it mean something than happen in a hospice bed with a nurse holding my hand out of pity. He set the folder back down in his lap. You didn't threaten my life, General. You gave me a schedule. That's a gift, where I come from. Most of us don't get one. For a long moment, Threk Von said nothing at all. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The recording of that exchange reached the general staff within the hour, because every cell on the Ashenfall was monitored and every monitor fed a central archive. And within 2 hours it had reached the flagship's senior officers, because gossip among the Threk moved exactly as fast as gossip among any species that lived in close quarters and valued rank. By the time the sun analog lamps in the officers' mess dimmed for the ship's night cycle, 3 different versions of the story were circulating, each stranger than the last, and all of them ending the same way. The human had laughed. Commander Ilsapren, second in command of the Ashenfall and 30 years Threk Vons Jr., found the general alone in his private observation bay, watching a starfield that didn't need watching. She had served under him for 6 years and had learned that he thought better with something to look at that wasn't a person. "You've heard," she said. "I was there," he said. "The crew thinks he's insane, or that it's a trick, some kind of human tactic, laughing at death to unsettle us." She said it carefully, testing. "It is not a trick," Threk Vons said. "I have interrogated frightened prisoners for 30 years, Commander. I have interrogated brave ones and stupid ones, and ones so terrified they soiled themselves before I'd said a word. I know what performance looks like. This was not performance." He turned from the window. "He believes it. That is what troubles me. He believes his death is a scheduled event, and he is relieved to know the date." "That's not possible," Pren said. "No creature is relieved to know it will die." "That is what I believed also," Threk Vons said. "Until 6 hours ago." Webb spent the first 2 days mostly sleeping, because the disease and the shipboard air recyclers were fighting for control of his lungs, and neither was winning cleanly. On the 3rd day, a young Threk soldier brought his meal, thin gray protein paste in a bowl shaped, again, without corners, and lingered in the doorway a moment too long. "You are called Vess," Webb said, remembering the name stitched into the soldier's collar in the angular Threk script. "Or something close to that. I'm bad with the throat sounds." The soldier's crest, a low ridge of retractable spines along a skull, flattened slightly. Surprise, Webb guessed, or wariness. "Vess Cuddy," he said. "You should not know my name." "I read it. I'm a diplomat, or I was one, for another 6 days. Reading names is most of the job." Webb pushed himself up against the wall. "You've never met a human before this ship, have you?" "No." "Sit down a minute. I promise I won't bite. I don't think my teeth are up to it these days anyway." Veskuddy did not sit. Threk soldiers were not permitted to sit in the presence of prisoners, a fact Webb would learn later. But he did stay, arms crossed, weight shifted onto one leg in a posture that on a human would have read as reluctant curiosity. "They say you are pleased to die," the soldier said. "Not pleased," Webb said. "Not exactly. I'd rather live. Given the choice between 40 more years and 7 more days, I'll take the 40 every time. But nobody's giving me that choice. The choice I actually have is between a death that means something and a death that doesn't, and I've had 4 months to get used to the idea that one of those two is coming regardless." He shrugged, which cost him something. His shoulders had gotten thin. Once you actually sit with that fact instead of running from it, it stops being the worst thing in the room. It's just a fact. Like weather. "Weather," Veskuddy repeated, testing the word. "You don't get angry at rain for existing. You just decide what to do while it's falling." The soldier's crest rose and fell again. That flicker Webb was starting to read as something between confusion and interest. "Among my people, death is the absence of everything. No self after. No memory carried forward. It is spoken of only in ceremony, and never lightly, and never by the dying themselves. A soldier who spoke as you have would be thought broken." "Maybe I am broken," Webb said. "Or maybe your ceremonies never had to survive 400 years of people dying anyway, no matter how much anybody feared it. We just built more ceremonies. Funerals, hospice houses, songs, jokes even. Whole industries of people whose entire job is helping other people die well. It's not that we don't fear it. We fear it plenty. We just decided a long time ago that fear wasn't going to get the last word." Veskuddy didn't answer that. He collected the empty bowl in silence, but at the door he paused. "The general has requested to see the full record of Varen's reach," he said. "Not the summary. The full record. He watched it twice last night." Then the door folded shut, and Webb was alone again with the ceiling and the hum of the recyclers, thinking that 7 days was starting to feel less like a countdown and more like an appointment book with entirely too much in it. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Threk Von had, in fact, watched the full record twice, and he watched it a third time with Commander Pren beside him in the small tactical viewing room off the bridge. The footage was drawn from the platform's own sensors, 61 minutes of raw feed from the failed negotiation and the chaos after, cleaned up only enough to strip audio glitches. There, Threck said, freezing the frame. On screen, in the seconds after the first shots, most of the human delegation was diving for cover behind a support strut. Webb was one of two who didn't. He was crouched instead beside a wounded Threck soldier, one of Soren's own guards, hit by friendly crossfire in the confusion, pressing his jacket against the wound with both hands. He is unarmed, Pren said slowly, and he is helping an enemy soldier. In the middle of an attack, he did not start. Keep watching. The footage rolled forward. A second human, a younger man Webb had brought as an aide, was shouting something at Webb. The audio was garbled, but the body language was clear enough, urging him to run. Webb didn't run. He stayed with the wounded Threck soldier until Soren's second wave arrived and took him into custody, at which point, and only at which point, he let go of the pressure on the wound and raised both hands. I have reviewed 40 years of hostile first contact incidents across 11 species, Threck said. I have never once seen a captured negotiator spend his final moments of freedom keeping alive a soldier from the side that just opened fire on him. Perhaps he calculated it would earn him leniency. Perhaps, Threck said. Or perhaps a species that has made its peace with its own death has room left over to care about someone else's. He shut off the display. Bring me his medical file. The real one, not the summary his government released to justify sending a dying man to a war zone. I want to understand what kind of mind does this. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The file, when it came, was longer and stranger than Threck expected, because human medicine had apparently developed an entire vocabulary for the specific problem of a body running out of time on a schedule, and none of it matched anything in Threck medical doctrine. Palliative care, advanced directives, hospice, a section titled Patient Wishes, in which Webb had, in his own handwriting, listed 6 things he wanted before the end, none of which involved fighting to survive longer, and all of which involved doing something he considered worth doing with whatever time was left. Number 4 on the list read, if a peaceful outcome with the Dominion is achievable, prioritize it over my own safety. I am already spending time I wasn't going to get anyway. Threck read that line 4 times. Commander Pren, standing at his shoulder, read it over his arm and said nothing for a long while. General, she finally said, if word of this reaches the crew in full, not the rumor, the actual document, I do not think the execution order will hold. Not because the crew objects to killing an enemy, because they will no longer believe it is killing an enemy. They will believe it is killing a dying man who wanted to spend his last weeks trying to stop a war. That is precisely why the order must appear to hold, Threck said. The Senate has already been informed a date is set. To cancel it now, with no cause given, would be read by every species in this coalition as weakness, and weakness is the one thing that unravels alliances built on fear rather than trust. He stood, joints in his long back cracking audibly. But an execution and a conversation are not mutually exclusive events, Commander. I have 6 days left to have the second. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. He returned to the cell alone the next evening. No guards, no translator staff, just the throat unit strapped under his jaw. Webb was awake, sitting up against the curved wall with the folder open across his knees, rereading something Threck couldn't see from the doorway. You're going to want to sit for this one, the general said, except I understand you're already sitting, so perhaps you're ahead of me. That's the first joke I've heard out of you, Webb said. I'll take it as progress. Threck lowered himself to the floor across from him, an act Webb suspected, that violated about 6 protocols regarding rank and prisoners, judging by the way the general's crest had flattened tight against his skull the moment he did it, as if bracing for a reprimand that wasn't going to come from anyone in the room. I watched your platform footage, Threck said. The medic work. The soldier you saved was one of Soren's own. He survived, incidentally. You may not have been told that. Nobody tells the prisoner much of anything, Webb said. Good. I'm glad. Why did you do it? Because he was bleeding and I had 2 working hands, Webb said, as if this were the most obvious thing in the galaxy. I wasn't going to let a man die on the floor just because his government and mine were shooting at each other. That's not his fault. That's not really anybody's fault in the room, most of the time. It's usually just fear wearing a uniform. You had 5 weeks left to live at that point, Threckvon said. By your own file. For now, I would guess, accounting for the days since. You spent some of that finite time keeping an enemy soldier alive. I had 5 weeks left to live no matter what I did that day, Webb said. The question was never how much time I had. It was what I was going to do with it. That's true for you too, General. It's true for everybody on this ship. You've just got a longer number attached to the same question, and I think that's why this is bothering you as much as it clearly is. He tapped the folder in his lap. You've read this thing 4 times. I can tell by the crease pattern on the corner you're holding. Threckvon's eyes flicked down to his own claws, folded around the edge of the file, and then back up. My people do not discuss death, he said, slower now, the rasp under the translator thickening. We fear it so completely that even the word carries weight in a room. When I lost my clutch siblings, you will have read that I wear the ring. I was given 6 days of formal silence, in which no one was permitted to speak to me at all, because it was believed that words near death might attract more of it. I spent those 6 days alone in a chamber not unlike this one, and I have not been at peace inside a small room since, until 3 nights ago, when I found myself standing in front of a man who was, by every measure my culture has, already dead, and yet he was the only calm thing in the conversation. I'm sorry about your siblings, Webb said, and meant it. That sounds like a hell of a thing to carry alone. It was not meant to be discussed. You are the first to say those words to me in 40 years. Then I'm glad I'm still around to say them, even on borrowed time. Webb shifted, wincing at some ache Threckvon couldn't diagnose and didn't ask about. Can I tell you something that might sound strange, coming from a man in a cell? You may. I think you came in here tonight looking for a reason to cancel my execution, Webb said, and you're having trouble finding one, because every reason you can think of makes you look weak to your own Senate. So let me give you a different kind of reason. One that doesn't cost you anything. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Don't cancel it. Ask me what I want to do with the 6 days I've got left instead. You'll get more out of that than you will out of a broadcast. I promise you that. Threckvon sat with that for a long time before he finally rose, joints cracking again, crest still flat and tight. I will consider it, he said, which was, Webb understood, as close as this particular general ever came to saying yes. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Word of the meeting did not stay contained, because nothing on the Ashenfall ever did. By the following morning, Vescudi had told 2 other soldiers in his unit that the general had sat on the floor of a prisoner's cell for 40 minutes, and that whatever kind of trick this human was working, it had gotten under the general's plating in a way nothing else had in living memory. By the evening, half the crew had heard some version of the story, and a smaller but growing number had started finding excuses to walk past the detention block, hoping for a glimpse. Commander Pren, for her part, requested, and was granted, permission to speak with the prisoner directly, on the grounds that intelligence gathering required it. This was not strictly a lie. She found Webb in better spirits than the medical file had led her to expect, sitting cross-legged with the translator unit the general had left him, working through a list on a scrap of Threk dataslate paper. Someone had clearly smuggled him against every regulation she was aware of. Commander, Webb said, I'd offer you a seat, but this room doesn't believe in furniture. I am not here to be comfortable, Pren said. I am here because I do not understand what is happening to my general, and I believe you are the cause of it, and I would like to know whether that is dangerous. Fair question. Sit anyway. Floor's not so bad once you've been here a few days. She did not sit, but she stayed, arms folded, and asked the question plainly. What do you want from him? Nothing, Webb said, and something about the flatness of it made her believe him instantly, which unsettled her more than a lie would have. I'm not working an angle, Commander. I don't have the energy left for angles, honestly. I came to Varen's Reach hoping to stop a war I won't live to see the end of either way. That's still true. If your general wants to talk to me about death because his culture never taught him how, I'm happy to talk. It doesn't cost me anything I wasn't already spending. Your species fascinates and disturbs my crew in equal measure, Pren said. We do not know what to make of a species that jokes at its own funeral. We're not laughing because it's funny, Webb said. We're laughing because the alternative is spending every day we've got left curled up in fear of a thing that's coming regardless of how scared we are. Fear doesn't buy you more time. It just makes the time you have worse. So somewhere along the way, enough of us decided that if the ending was fixed, at least the mood didn't have to be. He held up the data slate. This is a list, by the way. Since you asked what I want, General Threckvond told me to write down what I'd want to do with my remaining days if the sentence weren't the priority. I'm most of the way through it. Pren glanced at the list despite herself. It was written in a shaky human hand, translated in a second column beside it in Threck script. Evidently the general's own handwriting added later. 1. Speak with the Dominion Senate directly, not through intermediaries. 2. See the full record of what happened to the wounded Threck soldier. Webb wanted to know his name, whether he had a family, whether he'd recovered. 3. Ask that the remainder of the human delegation, still held in a separate detention section, be given proper medical care regardless of what happened to him. 4. Teach anyone aboard willing to listen, what a human funeral looked like, so that if his execution went forward, at least one alien species aboard this ship would understand it wasn't a defeat, but a kind of ceremony. 5. Ask General Threckvon if he was willing to finally speak the names of his lost clutch siblings aloud, since 40 years of silence around a wound rarely does anything but let it fester. 6 was blank. Number 6. Pren asked, against her better judgment. Haven't decided yet, Webb said. Figured I'd leave it open in case something better occurs to me before the deadline. That's sort of the whole trick, Commander. Leave room for something better, right up until you can't anymore. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. On the 4th day, Commander Pren returned to the cell a second time, this time with news rather than questions. The remaining members of Webb's delegation, held in a separate section of the ship since the platform assault, had been moved to proper medical quarters and given access to a Threck physician cross-trained in human biology. It was a small thing, procedurally, buried under a dozen other logistics orders that week, but Webb closed his eyes when she told him and was quiet long enough that she almost left before he spoke again. Thank you, he said. That was item 3. I didn't think anyone would actually follow through on it. The general signed the order himself, Pren said. He did not explain why. I did not ask. He didn't need to explain it to you, Webb said. He explained it to me 3 nights ago, without saying a word. That's usually how the important ones go. Later that same day, Vescuddy returned. Off duty now, technically not permitted in the detention block at all, though no one on the Ashenfall seemed inclined to enforce that particular rule anymore. He brought with him 2 other soldiers from his unit, both younger than him, both visibly uncertain about being there. You said you would teach someone what a human funeral looks like, Vescuddy said. I told them. They did not believe me that a ceremony for death could involve laughter. It usually does eventually, Webb said. Not right away. Right away, it's mostly quiet and crying, and people bringing food nobody's hungry enough to eat. But somewhere in there, someone tells a story about the person who died, something true, something a little embarrassing, maybe, and somebody else laughs, and then everyone realizes it's allowed. And after that the whole room breathes easier. We're not laughing because the grief stopped. We're laughing because the person mattered enough that even their absence has room for joy in it. Grief and joy aren't opposites where I come from. They live in the same house. And the body, one of the younger soldiers asked, haltingly, the translator lagging slightly behind his nerves. What is done with it? Depends where you're from and what you believe, Webb said. Burial, usually, or fire, or sometimes the sea if you served on one. My grandmother wanted her ashes spread over a lake she used to fish on as a kid. It took my whole family, a weekend, and a badly rented boat to get it right. We argued about which side of the lake the whole time. She would have found that hilarious. He smiled at the memory, thin but genuine. The point isn't the method. The point is that somebody who's still alive takes the time to do something deliberate with what's left, instead of just letting it happen to them. That's the whole trick to a good funeral. It's the last thing anyone gets to choose on someone else's behalf, so you choose it carefully, and you choose it with love. Vescuti's crest lay flat and still for a long moment. Among my people, the body is returned to the reclamation cycles within a day. No ceremony, no choosing. It is considered wasteful to delay it. Maybe that works fine for you, Webb said, not unkindly. I'm not here to tell anybody their way is wrong. I'm just telling you ours, because you asked, and because I think your general's been carrying something heavy for 40 years that a little ceremony might have helped with a long time ago. It's not too late for him. It's not too late for any of you, if you decide you want something different than silence. The three soldiers left without speaking again, but Vescuti lingered a half-step behind the others at the door, long enough to say one more thing. I do not think you are broken, he said. I think perhaps we are the ones who never learned how to grieve properly. I am glad you came to this ship, even under these circumstances. I am sorry it took your dying to teach us. Don't be sorry, Webb said. Be different going forward. That's worth more to me than an apology. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The Senate call happened on the fifth day, arranged not by Threkvan's authority alone, but by a growing quiet pressure from officers who had heard enough of the story secondhand to want to see it firsthand. A pressure Threkvan recognized as dangerous to ignore and privately was glad to have as cover. Webb spoke for 11 minutes to a holographic array of representatives from all 11 Dominion member species, most of whom had never addressed a human being directly in their lives. He did not plead for his life. He laid out in plain terms why the Coalition's fear-based alliance structure was cracking under its own weight, why humanity's colonies would keep fighting attrition wars long after any reasonable species would have quit, because human culture had spent millennia training itself not to fear the ending of things, and why an alliance built entirely on dread of a common enemy would eventually turn that same dread inward on itself, the moment the enemy stopped looking sufficiently frightening. You are afraid of dying, he told them, near the end, translator relaying his rasping, tired voice across 11 star systems at once. I understand that fear. It's not stupid. It's just incomplete. My species learned a long time ago that you can be afraid of death and still choose, every single day, not to let that fear run your life. That's not bravery. It's just practice. You've had this dominion for 200 years, and you've never had the practice, because you've never had to. We've had it for 4,000. I'd like to teach it to you, if you're willing to survive long enough to learn. The feed cut. Nobody spoke in the tactical room for nearly a minute. They will not agree to peace tomorrow, Threkvan finally said. The Senate does not move that quickly, no matter what has been said today. I know, Webb said. I never expected tomorrow. I expected a start. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. On the sixth day, 3 things happened that would matter later, though none of them looked especially significant at the time. The first was that the wounded Threk soldier from Varen's Reach, a young guardsman named Asafel, was located in a Dominion medical facility, alive, recovering, and, when informed that the human who'd kept pressure on his wound was scheduled for execution the next morning, recorded a short, unsolicited statement objecting to it, which somehow found its way into the informal channels crew members used to pass rumors between ships faster than any official broadcast could travel. The second was that Vescuti, the young soldier who had first lingered in Webb's doorway, formally requested reassignment off the Ashen Falls execution detail, citing what the request form clumsily translated as conscience regarding the target, and was quietly granted it by an officer who did not ask further questions, because 3 other soldiers had filed similar requests that same week. The third, and the one Threkvan would remember longest, was that he returned to the cell that evening, alone again, and sat across from Webb without being asked, and said 4 words that he had not said aloud in 40 years. Their names were Vale and Corin, he said. My clutch siblings. I have not spoken them since the silence ended, because no one ever asked, and I told myself that meant no one wanted to hear it. I do not know why I am telling a dying human this, in a cell, 6 days before I am meant to order his death. Because I asked, Webb said gently, and because 40 years is a long time to carry 2 names alone. I'm glad to hold them with you tonight, General, even just for a little while. Threkvan said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke again, his voice had lost the flat authority it usually carried. I do not know how to stop tomorrow from happening, he admitted. The order stands. The Senate expects it. If I rescind it without cause, they will read it as the Dominion's command structure buckling under a single human's rhetoric, and 3 border species will use that as justification to break from the coalition entirely. I have spent my whole career preventing exactly that kind of fracture. I know, Webb said. I never asked you to cancel it, General. I told you that from the start. I asked you to talk to me instead of just watching a broadcast happen to me. You did that. Whatever happens tomorrow, that part already worked. You are at peace with this. I'm at peace with the fact that it's coming, Webb said. That's different from wanting it. I'd still take 40 more years if someone offered. Nobody's offering. So I'm spending tonight instead of dreading tomorrow, and honestly, General, that's a better use of the time than most people get. He paused, then added quieter. For what it's worth, I think item 6 on my list just filled itself in. What is it? Get one alien general to say 2 names out loud that he'd been carrying alone for 40 years, Webb said. Turns out that was worth more to me than anything else on that list. Funny how these things work out. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The execution was scheduled for the ship's morning cycle, broadcast across a secure Dominion channel to 11 species, and through a diplomatic back channel neither government had officially acknowledged, patched through to a human relay station at the edge of the Kestrel expanse, because Threkvan had insisted over Senate objection that if this was to be humanity's example, humanity had a right to witness it directly rather than through second-hand alien reporting. He framed it to the Senate as ensuring the deterrent effect landed cleanly. He did not tell them the real reason, which was that Webb had asked for exactly one thing the night before, quietly, almost as an afterthought. I don't need anyone to save me, General. I'd just like my own people to see how I chose to spend the end, if it comes to that. Let them see it was a choice, not a defeat. The execution chamber was not a chamber at all, but a wide launch bay repurposed for the occasion. Banners of the 11-member species hung along the upper gantries, cameras arrayed on 3 sides. Webb was brought in under guard, a formality, since he could barely walk unassisted by that point, the disease having accelerated in ways his own doctors back home would have recognized and dreaded, and seated, not restrained, in a chair set at the center of the bay, because Threkvan had refused, flatly and without explanation, the Senate liaison found acceptable, to have him bound. Threkvan stood before him in full command dress, and for one long moment the 2 of them simply looked at each other, the way 2 people look at each other when a great deal has already been said and there isn't much left worth adding. Ambassador Webb, the general said, voice carrying across the bay, translated live into 11 tongues, and one more waiting nervously at a relay station 4 light years away. You were sentenced 7 days ago to die as an example, to end a war before it could spread. I have spent those 7 days trying to understand why a dying man laughed in my face when I promised to kill him. I believe I finally do. He turned, slowly, to face the assembled cameras rather than the prisoner. He was not laughing at death, Threkvan said. He was laughing because I offered him something my own culture has never had the courage to give its own people. A known ending, faced without shame, spent on purpose rather than wasted in fear. In 7 days, this human taught more soldiers on this ship what it means to die without losing yourself than any funeral right my people have practiced in 400 generations. He is called, by his own government's records, a citizen of what our intelligence reports have long termed the world of death, a species that fights wars the rest of us would have long since abandoned, because they have made peace with the one thing every other species in this coalition still runs from. He looked back at Webb. I promised to kill him, Threkvan said, and something in the translated voice cracked slightly, the machine straining to render an emotion it had no clean category for. I will not break that promise lightly, nor pretend before this Senate that I have the standing to cancel it unilaterally, without endangering everything this coalition has built. But I will say, before every species watching, that this execution will proceed as a testament, not a triumph, and that if any member of this Senate still believes fear is what holds an alliance together after watching these 7 days, they have learned nothing at all. He raised a weapon that every camera in the bay caught in full clarity. Webb, seated, weak, dying regardless of what happened in the next 10 seconds, looked up at him, without flinching, and said, quiet enough that only the nearest microphones caught it, translated a half-second later into 11 languages, and broadcast to a species for light years distant that had spent the last 6 days learning, for the first time in its history, that one of its own had gone out not in fear, but on his own terms. Thank you for the 7 days, General. Make them count for something after. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. What the Senate had not accounted for, and what no amount of protocol could have prepared them for, was that HFY, the young guardsman Webb had kept alive on Varen's Reach, had been quietly transported to the Ashenfall 2 days earlier at Commander Pren's discreet request, recovered enough to travel, and was standing at that exact moment in the gantry above the launch bay, with a data slate in hand and 40 other soldiers behind him, every one of whom had filed a request that week to witness the execution rather than be assigned elsewhere. As Threkvan's finger tightened on the trigger, HFY's voice rang out across the bay, unscheduled, unauthorized, and utterly unstoppable once it started. He saved my life. I will not stand silent while his is taken as an example the Senate is too afraid to even name honestly. One by one, the 40 soldiers behind him lowered their heads, not in defeat, but in the specific bowed posture Threk custom reserved for witnessing a death considered honorable rather than deserved, a posture that had never, in recorded Dominion history, been used for an execution. Threkvan stood with the weapon raised for 3 full seconds that felt, to everyone watching across 11 star systems and 1 distant human relay station, considerably longer. Then he lowered it. The order, he said, turning to the cameras, voice steady now, the crack gone, replaced by something closer to the tone of a man who had finally, after 40 years, stopped being afraid of the sound of his own conviction, is rescinded. Not because this Senate lacks the authority to demand it, because I have spent 7 days watching what fear does to good soldiers, and I will not spend the next 40 years the way I spent the last, in silence, wondering what I should have said instead. He turned back to Webb. You have taught my crew something in a week that I could not teach them in 3 decades of command, he said. I am not offering you a pardon out of mercy, Ambassador. I am ending an execution that was never going to accomplish what the Senate believed it would. What you do with whatever time remains to you is now entirely your own choice again. I would ask only one thing. Name it, Webb said, voice thin but steady. Item 6, Threkvan said. You told me it filled itself in 3 nights ago. I would like to know what you decided to do with the time you have left, now that it is, once again, uncertain how much of it there is. Webb managed something that might have been a laugh, weaker than the first one, but unmistakably the same kind. Same thing I decided 7 days ago, General, he said. Spend it on something that matters more than being afraid. Looks like I might get a little more time to do that than I planned on. I'll take it. 3 weeks later, from a hospice bed in a human relay station at the edge of the Kestrel Expanse, because the disease had not waited for any Senate's permission, and neither had Webb expected it to. He received a recorded message relayed across the same back channel that had once carried his execution. Threkvan's face filled the small screen, crest relaxed in a way it had never been in the 7 days aboard the Ashenfall. The Senate has agreed to a formal ceasefire, the general said. It will not hold forever. Alliances built on old fear rarely dissolve their fear in a single season. But it is a start, and you told me once that was all you expected. I have also spoken the names Vale and Corrin 3 times now, in front of others, and the ship has not fallen, and neither have I. I thought you would want to know. He paused, and for a moment the translator caught something that sounded almost like uncertainty. I do not know your customs for this, he said, but I understand humans mark the end of a life with ceremony rather than silence. If it would not be an intrusion, I would like to attend yours, when the time comes. I find I no longer wish to learn about death only through silence and old rings. I would rather learn it the way you taught it to me, awake, honest, and unafraid to speak the names out loud. Webb, too weak by then to record a long reply, sent back 4 words, the last message he would ever send across that back channel. Words that Threkvan would keep on record for the rest of his long command, long after the ceasefire hardened into something closer to peace, long after the world of death stopped being a term of dread among the Dominion's 11 species and started, slowly, becoming something closer to respect. Bring the names with you.